Hello again, everyone. I'm Father Joe Nazzle from Sonino Mission House in Berkeley. Our readings for the second Sunday of Lent range from a rather disturbing image of God in the book of Genesis to a dazzling display of divinity in the Gospel of Mark. But both stories of Abraham taking his son Isaac to offer as a human sacrifice in the book of Genesis, to the Gospel where Jesus takes three of his disciples up to the mountain and is transfigured before them to give a glimpse of glory, both reflect what Paul says in the second reading, where he reminds us that if God is for us, who can be against us? And the proof of this, Paul says, is that God did not spare his son, but handed him over for us all to save us. It's difficult to listen to the story from the book of Genesis or to believe in a God who would ask Abraham to murder his own son in order to prove his faith and his love. But to put this reading in a certain context, Sister Melanie Zavoda tells a story about the first time her father let her drive a tractor. She was about 5 years old, and her father jumped up onto the tractor first, and then with a swooping arm motion, lifted her up to sit in front of him on the seat. And she says, perched there in that seat in front of him, I felt very important, she said, and a little bit afraid. And then her father asked her if she was ready to go, and she shook her head up and down vigorously that she was ready. Good, her father said, now you steer. And she put her hands on the steering wheel, and her father turned the key, and the engine turned over, and the tractor shook beneath him. And over the roar of the motor, their father said in her ear, now hang on. And he gently released the clutch, and the tractor lurched forward, and instinctively she tightened her hands around that steering wheel, and the tractor moved slowly at first, and then her father gave it more gas, and soon the tractor was bouncing up and down over the fields. Too bad, she said, I don't have a picture of that image of her father and me on the tractor that first time, she writes. If I did, I know what I would see. There I am, back arched, she said, arms stiff, hands clenching that steering wheel. On my face is a look of grim determination. After all, I'm steering the tractor, or so at least I think I am. But the photo would show how my father is smiling, and his one hand is unobtrusively holding on to the steering wheel. With his other arm, he's holding on to Melanie, gently but firmly, to keep her in place. He is in control of the tractor, the picture would show. She said, he will see that no harm would come to me. Sister Melanie trusted her father and knew that he would do nothing to hurt her. Well, no doubt Isaac felt the same thing as he went camping with his father Abraham, but that trust turned to terror when the father tied him up upon wood on the altar. And can you imagine the fear in Isaac's face as his father raised his arm and knife to slaughter the son? Give me the image of God that Sister Melanie's reflected in her story. A God who, like her father in the tractor, is in control and always on the lookout so that no harm can come to us. But those who have studied the text of Genesis, especially in the context of the time it was written, they remind us that human sacrifice was an acceptable practice among certain cultures surrounding Israel at the time, suggesting that this story is really about God's strong admonition against sacrificing human life. So even though the reading begins with the line, God put Abraham to the test, this passage is really about condemning the practice, the pagan practice prevalent at the time, that was reflected in this misguided notion that the gods desired human sacrifice. In this passage, God is very clear about who is the author, the provider, and the protector of human life. The story of Abraham and his son Isaac's camping trip to the mountain, in a sense, foreshadows the trip that Jesus took with his disciples to the mountain and the glorious vision where they hear God declare, "This is my beloved son." Like Isaac, the disciples are terrified, obviously for different reasons. Here, the disciples don't know what to say or to do, a state of mind and heart that we often find them in the Gospels, which on some level makes them endearing and approachable. Like us, they don't have a clue most of the time. Well, here, even Peter, who's rarely at a loss for words, is even silent after initially wanting to make camp there on the mountain, pitch 3 tents, one for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. But both stories really underscore the same principle that is at the heart of Sister Melanie's story about her father and the tractor. It's not so much about God willing, or Abraham willing to do for God to prove his faith and love, but rather what God is willing to do for Abraham and to remind him that he will keep the divine promise forever. Remember what God says to Abraham: I will bless you abundantly. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands on the seashore. God assures Abraham and us that the Divine One will always be faithful to the covenant, that God will bring to life, even bring us to life, even out of those situations that seem destined to end in death. In the gospel, God tells the disciples that Jesus is his beloved Son. They are privy to this extraordinary moment that will be etched in their minds and hearts forever. And as they come down the mountain, Jesus tells them to remember this moment, especially when the shadow of the cross rises up to cause doubt later on. They will need to keep this a secret for now, he tells them, because they won't understand. They don't understand what it all means. But soon enough, as they are terrified by his arrest, his torture, and his crucifixion, Jesus tells them to hold on to this memory that they witnessed on the mountain. This mission will not end in the slaughter of the beloved Son, but in a new creation. The end is not in the blood and gore of the cross, but rather in the glory of the resurrection. And that's why I think Jesus wanted Peter and the others to keep his identity and as well as what happened on that mountain a secret until after the resurrection, at least until they experienced firsthand what suffering means and how new life can come out of death. I remember a woman on a retreat once who was going through a difficult time telling me that the story of the Transfiguration really taught her something very important about the journey of faith. She said, when I'm on top of the mountain, I'm like Peter. I want to build a shrine. I want to pitch a tent. I want to stay here forever. But to mark this moment and to never forget it. But she said, we're sent back down the mountain instead to be shrines to other people. We can build all the shrines we want, but unless we become living shrines that reveal and reflect the presence of God to others and to our world, our houses of prayer, our churches, our worship spaces will be empty places instead of sacred spaces. Oh, they may be filled with holy objects and sacred relics that reflect something mysterious and holy happened here once upon a time. But unless we become holy ourselves, revealing and reflecting God's divine intervention in our lives and our trust and love for God, our shrines will simply stand as museums and sometimes even mausoleums instead of mission houses of prayer. Our readings this weekend really do invite us to trust in God. And as Sister Melanie understood when she was 5 years old and drove the tractor for the first time, that her father was really the one in control and no harm would come to her. So in our prayer this week, may we climb into the lap of God and know we are in a safe and sacred space, that no harm will come to us. Please stay safe, take care of one another, take care of yourself as we meet in prayer. God bless you and your family.